this is perhaps my favorite topic. I've written a lot about criminal states and have always had in mind in looking at corrupt governments and multinational corporations what U.S. anti-racketeering law calls a CCE, a continuing criminal enterprise. This is from American anti-racketeering law. It's what Donald Trump is being prosecuted under right now for trying to steal an election. It's a criminal conspiracy. I was, for a few years, on a World Economic Forum advisory panel. They'd fly us to Dubai or Abu Dhabi once a year, and we would think big thoughts with other people. I was the only journalist on the multinational organized crime panel, and I kept bringing up, well, you have entire states and corporations that are criminal enterprises. Why are we just looking at drug smuggling gangs? Finally, one day I was taken aside and said, you know, Dave, it's the World Economic Forum. That's not going to happen here. And sure enough, I wasn't invited back. That was the end of my time with those folks. It's absolutely essential to what we're doing today. The world has become so criminalized. When I was, I came to Washington from, I'd been overseas for a while, and I'd done a book on the Japanese doomsday sect that had nerve gassed the Tokyo subway. I was living in Tokyo at the time. And when I came to Washington, this was 96, the debate was about who is our enemy now that the Cold War is over. The Berlin Wall had fallen, Soviet-style communism had ended, and the U.S. national security establishment was holding all these seminars, and because I'd done a book on terrorists, I was invited to some of them. Who's our enemy? Is it nuclear proliferation? Is it terrorism? Is it international organized crime? And is it unusual threats like climate change? So there was a really interesting debate at the time. 9/11 changed all that, and the entire U.S. intelligence establishment became focused on terrorism. And when I look back at that debate now, I realize that we missed the real enemy, and that was kleptocracy and creeping criminalization of the global economy. And you could see it. You could see it in Russia. You could see it in Asia, in Africa. We're finally catching up to that fact that our democracies, our civil rights, independent media are threatened by this. So in some ways, I think, along with climate change, this is right there at the top. To talk about that, we have three terrific speakers today. I'll introduce you all one by one, okay? Then I can go to your bios, which I'm clearly not prepared to do right now. But Penele Ramirez, right? And GIJC, you're going to have to help me with your last name. Omete, okay. And you are?
Bob.
Drew Sullivan. We're going to start with Drew, who's going to paint a little more of the big picture, and then we'll come back to you at the end. And then we'll go to Penele and finish with GIJC. Drew?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Dave. You set that up perfectly for me because, when Dave talks about that time when the U.S. intelligence was looking at what our next threat was, something very interesting was happening in the world. The Berlin Wall had fallen. It unlocked a huge amount of resources that had been really unavailable for a long time, underexploited. And it really led to a historic shift of money from the developing world to the developed world, as a large amount of those resources were actually stolen over the next 20 years. And so that was really the start of really the globalization of organized crime and corruption, which really became, a significant industry in the world. And it really came about because of a large group of enablers that really made this possible. And to really to understand this from a reporting standpoint, this is an industry. And we really need to think of it as an industry. It's got its own criminal services sector. Those are the lawyers and the law firms, the registration agents, the hedge funds, all these organizations that are basically make a tremendous amount of money off of organized crime. If you've ever covered banking, banks they just keep working as hard as they can to keep taking money from this group of individuals. We covered Credit Suisse, and despite standing up 11 times and saying, we will never take money from bad people again, we caught them with another large group of bad people. So really, this industry just understands that they'll take fines, but it really pays to continue working on this. So this whole industry kind of developed, and if you were an organized crime guy coming out of Russia, in the early 90s, you had all these things available to you. You could go to London and get a high-class lawyer, who would basically protect you and also attack media that would say things about you. You had the banks, which really worked out of their way to set up relationships around the world for you so that you could move your money effortlessly between countries. You could instantly get a global footprint from a registration agent that would allow you to set up a global network of offshore companies that you could do just about anything from tax evasion to customs fraud to embezzlement from your company, anything you wanted to do with those. You could buy a security company so you could get men with guns that can protect you in the country. You can get lobbyists that would help you get the political influence. You had in the United States PACs, but in many different places you could contribute large amounts off the books to political parties so that you could buy influence in that political party. You could put your money in hedge funds in the West so that you could buy businesses and other things that can help you, give you global credibility. If you had a couple $1 billion, you could really set yourself up. And it turned out that really the goal of all of this was state capture. And this has happened in a number of different countries around the world. And it was a weird combination of people with different interests. You have organized crime, you have extremist political groups, you have libertarian billionaires, you have existing corrupt states, and they all use the same system, and you could go and one lobbyist would introduce you to all the people you needed to know. And that's why you started getting these weird combinations of, MBS in Saudi Arabia and Donald Trump and Bolsonaro, getting together and becoming great chums. They all had the same interest of undermining democracy and working together. So now the nation-state boundaries don't really matter. Hungary is looking at gaining influence in its neighboring countries. It wants to create a greater Hungary, with great influence. So they're buying up media in places like Macedonia. And there's become a playbook for kind of these people to work. And the first thing is we are the canary in the coal mine. You take over media. And so by looking at the level of independent media in a country, you can get a sense of where the country is, on that kind of path towards autocracy and state capture. And then the next thing you do is undermine, the court system. You throw out the judges that you can, you bring in the judges that are corrupt. Everybody has to be corrupt. The whole system, you need people who are corrupt because they know how the game is played. And, you think you're in a democracy or you think you're in a political system, and this is really criminal structures that are coming in there, and they don't care about all this. They have to undermine it. And so, the head of the Serbian police was fired because he was found at a crime scene with a high-power hose, basically, watering everything down to make sure that no evidence could be collected. These are the types of people you need in your administration. and you could see around people like Donald Trump, there was these corrupt people that would come out of the woodwork. They recognized their kind, and they would, instantly kind of suck up to these people, and then provide them kind of those greater tools. And so, once you kind of undermine the law enforcement, and then you go after the prosecutors. When the president of Serbia came into power, he fired all the organized crime prosecutors and all the organized crime investigators from the police force. Why would you do that, unless you are a criminal structure? And so you see kind of this slow capture of the state, and then on top of it, your PR firm is your propagandists, which also can be bought. You can go out and hire them, and then you propagandize the people to basically get them in fearful enough that they will continue to follow you. And unfortunately, this has worked over many, many different countries. So now you have really countries that are pure criminal states. So there used to be, North Korea. And, North Korea made their money by, they have printing presses that make fake US dollar bills, and they trade drugs. And that was really kind of their economy for a long time. But now you have whole countries that are doing this. So you have countries like, Serbia is a criminal state. Its minister of health used to murder people. He was a doctor who murdered people in hospitals that didn't die when they were shot on the streets. He also, when the president of Prime Minister GIJC was shot, he was the attending physician, in the emergency room. So you have, cases where you're literally killing people, on behalf of these criminal states. And so once you, capture it, then you become a kleptocracy. Then you just loot it. Every natural resource goes to your class of oligarch who you've designated, who take over these resources, and then you just loot, and you all become tremendously wealthy, and then you use this wealth to maintain the state, and to buy property in London and New York. So this is how they see this, and they're criminal angel investors that you can get money from, to help, structure some of these things, and there are plenty of people who will help you, do this, various aspects of this. All of this is serviced. All of these things that you need, there is a consultant who will help you do this, and we've seen them move from state to state. What was the London firm that was helping Trump on the election? What was their name? They're closed now, but
Cambridge Analytica.
Cambridge Analytica, yeah. So Cambridge Analytica was doing this, yeah, and they've now split up. They got closed down, but all the people who were in kind of the core group of Cambridge Analytica have set up their own operations, and so they're all over the place. So it would be fascinating. I'm looking for a donor to give me $2 billion to go out and capture a state. I'm looking at maybe Albania as the one I'm going to capture, although there's a lot of competition for that. And then to prove that you can actually do it. So if there's a donor in the room who's got $2 billion spare, I want to do that as a news story.
Anybody?
So
all right. Remember, you're doing a short.
I'm just concluding.
Drew's supposed to paint the big picture here.
So that's where we are, and it's depressing. And we also do children's parties if anybody needs.
Perhaps it's an after effect from last night. Sorry, you're probably wondering who is this guy. Some of you, because I failed to introduce him. So let me back up. This is Drew Sullivan. He is the co-founder and inspiration behind the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and one of the go-to people on organized crime around the world. They've just done phenomenal stuff on giant money laundering operations they call laundromats around the world, and gotten massive leaks from these banks. That's how you know what you're talking about. Anyway, one of the real experts in there. And we'll come back to him for an afterword after we hear from our next two guests. Okay? Now, it is my honor to introduce Penele Ramirez. So we've got Latin America, particularly Mexico. Though you're originally from Cuba, are you not? Yes. And then GIJC is from Nigeria. He's going to talk about the criminalization of Africa, which is unbelievable. We did a guide on that, but we'll wait on that. So let me properly introduce Penile. She's a former investigative correspondent for Univision, which is the big Spanish language network in the U.S. and Latin America. She's participated in global projects like the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers with ICIJ. She's part of an independent production group that's doing really innovative work based in the States, and has been fearless in her coverage of the criminalization of Mexico, which is a real case study. Mexico's getting worse and worse, isn't it? Penile?
Well, thank you, and thank you all for being here after the party last night. So basically what I will do in the next 10 minutes is to present a case study to prove all the things that Drew said. I don't have 2 billion, but I have 3 billion from the US government. So we'll see how that works. So this is a case that starts in Mexico, using Mexico as a case study. Part of my I want to provoke all of you to ask yourself if Mexico is a criminal state or is it a kleptocracy of a mafia state, all of that. So I will do my best so you can respond to this at the end of my presentation. And I want to start with the present and go to the back. So right now, as we know, we have a fentanyl crisis, mainly in the US. 7 of each overdoses in the US are caused by fentanyl, mainly produced by 2 Mexican cartels. The main Mexican cartel that we are talking about today is the Sinaloa cartel. And for recent years, the U.S. government has been sending $3 billion to Mexico to help pledged tackle corruption from Mexico and address the drug demand from the US. And the money was managed mainly by one person, the person that you are about to meet today, and that's why I will tell you a spy story in 10 minutes. So some of you could maybe know this guy. This is El Chapo Guzman, a drug lord, really famous from Mexico. He was indicted and sentenced in the US in 2019. So during his trial, this other person was mentioned. He was the head of the Secretary of Public Security of Mexico, but he had 2 side jobs. The first side job was helping the DEA and the CIA mainly to work in Mexico. The second side job was to work with this other guy, El Chapo Guzman. He was convicted for a continuous criminal enterprise, just as David mentioned. He was convicted this year, but before that, he was called the architect of the war on drugs. This was called by the New York Times, and he went with a lot of U.S. officers, including Barack Obama, the U.S. president. But now he's guilty. He was declared guilty in February of this year, mainly because of this multitasking job of helping El Chapo while running the Secretary of Public Security in Mexico. So the question is how he made it. I didn't focus that much on that part of the criminal enterprise, but on another part of the criminal enterprise about how was used the money that was sent from the US to Mexico. And to do that, again, quoting Drew, I used this. I used government records, financial records, judicial, and leaks. So this is the guy, Genaro Garcia Luna, with the Mexican president. In 2006, it was declared the war on drugs, and a lot of people, more than 300,000 people have died since then. And again, let's go to this guy in particular. How I did it, I started by the book, first with global records, then US records, then local records, then, of course, property records and tax records, to really try to understand why this guy was so rich at the same time that he was a public officer in Mexico, where the salaries are not really that big for officers. So I want to introduce you to this lady, Cristina Pereira, that's Garcia Luna's wife, and I found that she had a restaurant in Miami. This is the restaurant. It's really not really good, the food. I have been there a couple of times. But the name of the restaurant in in the corporate records was Los Cedros, and a colleague of me, Anabel Hernandez, who was investigating Garcia Luna before me, found that Cristina had 2 restaurants named Los Cedros in Mexico. So they were not that original, they just imported the name to the United States. And after I started with this, I moved to this, and I started a list of other companies that were related to the same company. I have been tracing more than 40 companies in the last 13 years doing this investigation. And some of the companies had properties. So what I did is I moved to other open sources by looking for real estate pictures. So I want you to pay attention to two things: the furniture in the living room and the painting that you see in the wall. That painting is the 2 volcanoes in front of Mexico City, beautiful painting. And you will see the painting again. This is another property. This is another property that was part of the net. So if you see, you can have fun comparing the pictures, like finding the 7 difference. That's the way I proved that he was living in one place and then the other place. And he even had his pictures there. You can see the picture of him and Cristina kissing. Oh, so beautiful. And then if you go to put the same address in YouTube, you will see that there is a dash, right? Do you see the dash, really? It's here, right? So from a leak, I got the certificate of title, and I found this company. And this company, it's a Florida company that is related to a Panamanian company that is related to another 40 companies in Luxembourg, Taiwan, Panama, UK, Mexico, and the United States. And all of them are connected to these 2 gentlemen here. This is Garcia Luna, celebrated the birthday party of this other guy. And the guy laughing out loud, of course, is Samuel Weinberg. He's a Mexican citizen, originally from Poland. The family went to Mexico escaping from fascism. And he was the lucky guy who was signing on behalf of this Israeli company this big contract for surveillance security equipment to Mexico. So they started with this contract by looking for public records. I found that he was the sole representative of this company in Mexico to buy this surveillance equipment and system called NICE. And this guy that you see here, he was working closely with Garcia Luna by the end of the government of Calderon. But at the same time, he also has a side job. And the side job was to work at the same time for the government and for a private company of the Weinberg family to work with the equipment that was bought by the Mexican government, and it was used at the same time in this private company. Here is him sending an email to the people from NICE saying, oh, we need some, please come and prepare. And then, after the government was done, they gave him, Garcia Luna, a consultant agreement with a Panamanian company, and they were paying him a flat fee of $50,000 monthly to serve as a consultant for their company in Miami. They created 2 companies. One belongs to the Weinberg, ISID, and the other one belongs to Garcia Luna. And as you see, there are some coincidence in the websites. You can see the websites look alike. They have the same phone number. When I ask them, why you have so similar website, they say, oh, because we hired the same web designer. So the impact of this investigation so far in 2021, the Mexican government presented a civil lawsuit in Miami. You can see from the spreadsheet to a civil lawsuit the case is alive. So far, they have found that this criminal take of the war on drugs in Mexico resulted in almost $600 million that were addressed to the Weinbergs, and more than $10.5 million that went directly in bribes to Garcia Luna himself. I wrote the book, and then I did a podcast. After this podcast, the impact of this part was like the U.S. Senate opened an investigation to try to understand why Garcia Luna was using all this money that was sent from the U.S. To Mexico to help prevent the drugs to come to the U.S., and they ended up using it in these fancy places in Miami. We're not done with the investigation, so I welcome any tips that you have about how to continue. Thank you so much.
Good one. Wow. Yeah, let me introduce you. I'm going to get some water while I'm introducing him, too. Great use of public records. Really following the paper trail. Why didn't U.S. officials vet this guy better? Some of this was in plain sight, right? We'll come back to you. Just hold that thought. Now let me do again a proper intro here. All right, GIJC23 is he's one of the best reporters in Africa. Let's start there. And he's in Nigeria, which is one of the best case studies of corruption and looting of the public commons. I've done trainings in both Abuja and Lagos, Chikeze, and you know, the Nigerians are so enterprising. It is so tragic that so much of the wealth has been looted. It should be one of the superpowers of the world. He's also part of OCCRP, Drew's organization. He's been with the ICIR, the International Center for Investigative Reporting in Nigeria. He's got a background in covering health and education, years of experience, broadcast, print, online. He won the Development Communications Network's Journalism Award, and he's just a consummate reporter. So, Chikeze, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Probably I will start by asking questions. Does anybody here come from a criminal state? Oh, really? Well,
well, you should talk about the definition between kleptocracy.
So what about kleptocracy? Okay, so I mean, for us that are working for OCCRP, then our job is protected because that's what we do. I mean, we cover organized crime and corruption, and we track them across the border. But I will start with West and Central Africa. I mean, if you have been following events in West and Central Africa, well, I think we have the 8Q some weeks ago, and then we are looking at the next country that the military will take over power. But it's just a symptom of what is happening. It's just like when you have a virus, I mean it will take over your cell, and then before it will just hide there for a while, and then it starts spreading. And before you know it, you start seeing the physical manifestation of a virus taking over your body. And that is exactly what is happening in Africa. So when I was much younger, what we used to have is that criminals will, sponsor a politician that is decent. I mean, they are interested in controlling power, but because they can't run, because they have criminal records, they look for a decent man and say, "Oh, come here. We'll sponsor you. We'll make the money available. We'll get the best PR to make sure that you win election. If you don't, like, we can manipulate the election in your favor. We can use violence or anything to get you in power." So there is a quid pro quo. When you get into power, then you need to help us, allow us to use the port to smuggle drugs or smuggle so many things. And that was happening for a while. But then there is now a new wave of criminals thinking that we are just tired of being kingmakers. That we can be the king. Why should I make another person a king when I can be a king? I mean, that I have a criminal record, I'm suspected of being a criminal or a mafia boss, doesn't stop me from, winning the political power and then using my criminal network to run the government. And that is what we are witnessing across Africa. I mean, if you look from where I come from in Nigeria, from Nigeria to Sudan, to Zimbabwe, to across Africa. So this is the manifestation of what is going on. So when they get there, they're not interested in running the government, in making life better for the people. They are just interested in perpetuating their criminal activities. So they get the power, and then use it to advance their purpose. In Nigeria, for example, there is an organized stealing of, Nigeria is a single product economy, so we depend on oil, which we have been extracting since independence from Britain in the 1960s. But can you imagine that in Nigeria, on a weekly basis, millions of barrels of oil are stolen? And it's not like it's stolen in a small container. They use like large vessels that will dock like in our international waters. They fill it up and then take it to Europe, refine the crude oil, and then bring it back to Nigeria to sell to us. So, I mean, there is no way if government is not involved or people in government is not involved that there will be that kind of massive stealing of crude oil. I mean, you have the Navy. I mean, so what the criminals do is that when they take over power, I mean, they compromise the states, agencies like the military, the police, the customs. So you can't stop. If you stop them, they will remove you. So you have this organized theft. If you look at Sudan, for example, it's mainly, before it descended into chaos, Sudan was largely dependent on exporting gold. But much of the gold produced in Sudan, about 80% of the gold is smuggled. And then you'll be wondering, so who are the people smuggling this gold? There's no way you can smuggle gold. It's not like, it's not something that's tiny you can just put in your pocket and then pass through the airport. But then they have a way of doing this because people in governments, from the central bank down to the customs, are the people who are benefiting from this smuggling. So there is an official cover for that. So, but like what we are seeing all over across Africa, and some of you raise your hand that you come from a criminal state, and you know what is going on there. I mean, if you're looking at the network, you see that people who get important positions, who get like everything, are people who depend on this network. And if you have been covering this wherever you come from, and then you are looking at the development, and then asking questions, who gets what, when, and how, then you begin to understand how this network operates. It's just like the cells in your body, communicating to each other. Whenever a virus takes over and they start communicating, and they start spreading, and then you take over the whole system. So, it's a shame what is happening, and the people, you just be wondering, so why can't the people rise and stop the criminals from taking over the government? These are developing countries with weak institutions, and then once you have the money, and then you have organized violence, everybody's afraid. People like poverty is high. The population is largely uneducated, so they don't understand what is going on. So those who understand what is going on, who are decent enough to be in government, don't want to get involved because there's too much violence. If you get there, you'll be killed. If you are decent enough, like the advice they will give you, don't go into government because you mess up your name, and there's a potential of being killed. So they left the arena for the criminals to take over. Starting from the local government to the state, and then you have these criminals there. Like, I will give you an example. During the regime of General Sani Abacha between 1995 and 1998, so he stole about, I estimated, more than $4 billion from Nigeria. Much of this money ended up in Switzerland, in UK, and the US. So this money is still being recovered. I think so far, more than $2 billion have been recovered from the money Abacha looted. Well, one of the guys that helped Abacha to lose this money, he was like an importer then, a businessman. He was not in government. So this guy helped Abacha to hide money in several jurisdictions. He's still under investigation in the US. But can you imagine that he repatriated some of the money, and he made a deal with Nigerian government, and he was shielded from prosecution. But then this guy ended up being a senator, then ended up being a governor, and currently he's a minister in charge of budget and national planning. You see how this is progressing. So they are taking over. It's not just on the sideline being a businessman running a shady business. They are now capturing power and using the power to do whatever they like. So I think I will stop here. Thank you.
I think you were just getting going. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go back to Drew in a second to give some reaction to this, but a couple of questions come to mind. One is, let's give this to Drew. We should define our terms, and Drew and I did a dialogue on GIJN's website last year on criminal states and kleptocracies. And I was fascinated with Drew's answer about that. There is a difference, okay? Kleptocracy we think of as government by theft, and it's just corruption permeates the place. But a criminal state is something a little different. It's worse, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a state working for one criminal group. You know, as opposed to a kleptocracy is kind of a system of stealing that's kind of given to a large group of people, but the state basically relies on a corruption system to operate, whereas a mafia state or a criminal state is really an organization that's a captured state, and it's really being just bled, you know, for that particular criminal group. And so a very small number of people.
Okay, name a few very clear out-and-out criminal states.
So I would say, I mean, you know, clearly, you know, North Korea is probably a criminal state
From the top down.
benefiting
Yeah.
a single family.
Yeah.
You know, you could argue, you know, a state like Azerbaijan kind of is part kleptocracy, part criminal state, and there's a lot of those type things. But then you get into something like Serbia, Montenegro under Djukanovic. That really is a criminal state that's acting for one specific family and group of people.
Mexico and Nigeria.
So I think Mexico is very complex because it's you know.
Well, that's why I choose to bring this case study in particular, because I think that Mexico is a democracy, and it is a democracy because you have not a single family. You have different families benefiting, you have different parties, and you have sometimes one party is winning, sometimes another party is winning, which is good for us as journalists because you can do your investigation as the one that I presented today and wait until another political party comes, and so they will persecute the case like is happening right now. But at the same time, no matter what's the party in power, they will be benefiting and working with the same groups. Therefore, that means basically Sinaloa cartel of Jalisco New Generation. So it's not, as you said, it's complex because it is a kleptocracy for sure, but at the same time, you don't have, for example, like you had in Colombia at some point where the narcos were really trying to be in the parliament themselves. They are feeding money into the political system. They are, in many places, there is no way a candidate can win if they don't have an agreement with them. I will say more is a narco state in a lot of ways because it's not a family, it's a cartel. I hope this answers.
How about Nigeria, Chikezi? Kleptocracy or criminal state? It's like a game show, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Chikezi, criminal state or kleptocracy?
It's just like the argument about a failed state and a failing state. Okay, most countries can be classified as a failing state, and then when you say it's a failed state, then that is another realm of definition and argument will arise. Obviously, Nigeria is a kleptocracy, but is it a criminal state? Not really. So, I mean, but does it have the characteristics, the features of a criminal state? Yes, but it's not, it's complex. You can't say it's a criminal state because you still have some measure of decency in some of the things that government does. So, I can say categorically that it's not a criminal state, but obviously a kleptocracy. But I'll just give you an example. I mean, if you follow events in Nigeria, we just had an election early this year. And I think in our history, it's the first time the most controversial figure in Nigeria to become a president, our current president, Ahmed Bola Tinubu. So he has had some, cases in the past. In 1993 in the U.S., they forfeited nearly $500,000 connected to narcotic trafficking. And then, like in OCCRP, I mean, when he started running, we were interested in investigating this guy. Who is this guy? What does he have? He has been accused of a lot of things. He was a governor of a Nigerian state, the Nigerian richest state, Lagos. So when he was a governor, he was accused of massive stealing. But there is nothing to his name. Like, there are companies you can point out to, TV stations, radio stations, and point out that he owns these organizations. But nothing is connected to him. Nothing is connected to his children or his wife or even his relatives. So this guy is difficult to investigate. But then we keep digging and all that. So we had a breakthrough when the UK passed the new property law that, of beneficial ownership. And we were able to make some connections that he had a property, another controversial property, handed over to his son, worth about $70 million and all that. But then, if you have somebody like that, very controversial, so he used to be a kingmaker. I mean, like, he was powerful in northwest, in southwest of Nigeria, and he was instrumental to bringing in a lot of governors into power. But nobody knew that he was going to run for president because we thought he wasn't really the kind of person we wanted to be the president. But we had so much money, but we don't know where the money came from. So we don't know anything about this guy. His history, background, everything started in the US in the 70s. So what happened? He's over 70 years, but you have this guy, all we know about his history started in the US. We don't know the primary school he went to, the secondary school he went to. We just had like suddenly. And so many things are his age, everything is so controversial, but it ended up being, the president. So you start asking yourself, does it mean that why couldn't we stop somebody like that? It's just like what happened in the US. Why couldn't the Americans, so advanced and, a leading country in the world, so powerful, and they elected somebody like Donald Trump? So these are the questions as journalists we are asking ourselves, and we are digging, and they're looking at, the networks to say, okay, what kind of connection does he have? We keep looking into this, but then I will categorically say that Nigeria is not yet a criminal state. Thank you.
Yeah. When we in the States were watching the ascent of Donald Trump, those of us with international experience were just shocked because we had seen this movie before overseas, and we knew it ended badly. Drew was alluding to it, the playbook for autocrats. First, you go after the press. You compromise law enforcement. You go after the judiciary. We had seen this play out in so many countries, and we couldn't believe it was happening not only in the U.S., but so easily, and that the guardrails of democracy were just not that strong. You know what saved the U.S. was, in the end, it's the judiciary and the press. Barely. And we're still not there yet. Anyway, look, I am coming back to you. But let me give you one question to bear in mind, because we're always about tools and techniques here. So, how do you? Pennylay showed some of this. But how do you take on such a vast target when the entire state is arrayed against you, when all the levers of government, or so many of them, law enforcement and the judges and the civil servants, are part of a criminal enterprise? Is there anything special that you guys employ to deal with this increasingly common situation of kleptocracy? So we've defined some levels there: kleptocracy, narco states, criminal states, and criminal enterprise.
Yeah, it's difficult, and we've lost in a lot of countries. I mean, our reporters in Azerbaijan have left. Our reporters in Russia have left. We've had a lot of places where we've become expat media, and so we're losing a lot of these things. But to actually report on this, you really have to see this as a system. Journalists tend to always think of individuals as individuals and not look at the system. But you really, in this particular case, you have to look at the system because it's the system that creates these people and it's the systems that define these people. And so you have to look at the structures of the business structures. You have to look at the social networking that's going on because it's sometimes what matters is what lobbyists are using. You know, what matters is you know the registration agents. And so you piece together and you make a map of money and power. And so we're constantly building maps of money and power to try to understand how the system, and this is how, you know, the analogy is the banking system. You know, we talked with Deutsche Bank, and when they explained how they were doing money laundering, which is another structured system, they said, well, we look at an individual transaction and we see if this is money laundering. Well, no individual transaction is money laundering. It's a network of transactions that really launder the money. And so they were purposely looking too narrowly so they wouldn't see the system. We as reporters have to track this, and we use things like Aleph, our knowledge management system, which basically takes all these records, does an entity extraction. We've defined a taxonomy for organized crime and corruption. So we know what to look for, and it's things like crypto wallets and you know property addresses, and you pull out those entities and you constantly cross-reference them together to build out the structure, because you have to report it as a whole structure and not as an individual thing, because that's where you see the tie-in between the enablers, the legitimate businesses, and then the criminal businesses.
I'm reminded of a little story. I had a source in U.S. Customs and was looking at Dubai as a center for money laundering, and he told me how he went there and was explaining to a local businessman the concept of money laundering, and the guy seemed puzzled. He said, laundering money, Mr. John? But that's what we do. It's so integrated into business. You know, you're not fighting a criminal economy. You're fighting the Chamber of Commerce.
And you know, actually, there's a fight going on between people trying to take Dubai out as the #1 money laundering place. So you have like the White City in Azerbaijan being built, and you have places in Latin America, and so the fight is going on behind the scenes over who gets to launder money. You know, so there's a fight within the criminal services industry, just, you know, for the benefits of all of this.
Let me go back to sort of tips and techniques real fast, and then we want to open it up to questions, because I'll bet you have some great ones. Penny, can you talk a little bit about, you know, how you did really good public records research, I think, and you got leaks, and that just sounds like good investigative reporting.
Thank you. Yeah, so I started the investigation with a single tip. And the tip was, this is the end of November of 2012. Garcia Luna is about 2 weeks from leaving the government. And the tip was that he was traveling a lot to Miami. And I must confess, I was thinking about saying this or not, but my family lives in Miami. Thanksgiving was approaching, and I said, well, if I get it, they will send me for reporting there. And they did. So, but I didn't know anything at that point about him. I never investigated him before. So I started, as I said, by the book with, okay, why he's traveling to Miami? He must be doing something there, like traveling constantly. So it was like, is he owning a house there? Is he owning a business there? Does he have any money interest there? And so I started with what I had. What I had was the name of his name, was nothing under his name, the name of the wife, and the restaurant came up. So I took the restaurant as the first clue, and then I went over all the annual reports, the corporate that were public from the restaurant, and I found that the manager of the restaurant was a guy who was linked to another corporation. And this another corporation was linked to a third corporation. And this third corporation, the owners of that corporation was a guy named Sammy Weinberg and a guy named Alex Weinberg. So it didn't sound that Mexican, Sammy Weinberg. But then I tried to dig more about him. It was almost nothing published about him. And then I found that the name was not Sammy Weinberg, was Mauricio Samuel Weinberg Pinto. And I said, this sounds Mexican. That doesn't sound anymore like an American partner. So I started focusing on him instead of Garcia Luna. And I have been doing this since 2012. I have never found a single document where they are together. That's going to Drew. Is the only thing, the closest thing I have to them together is what I presented here, that is they both attending Sammy Weinberg's birthday party. But even in that party, they never took a photo together. So we're not accusing them of being, stupid. So they know what they're doing. But at the same time, it was like using whatever, like this, using real estate, comparing the decoration of the living room, like using YouTube videos to try to see the house and go over the whole video to see, oh, there is a picture of them in the living room. So those kind of things that were what I had. And of course, as you know, this is a tip forever useful. Publish what you have as decent as possible, and some people will come to you. So after years publishing, I received an email from someone that says, oh, I used to work with the NICE system, but not in the government. We were in this office in Polanco, which is a nice neighborhood in Mexico City. And I was like, what? So I talked to this source. This person gives me an interview, and I said, but how you can prove that you were working there? And this person says, oh, I have all the emails that we have working. I said, whoa. So this person gives me more than 100 emails. And tracing the emails, I was able to find who were the other people that were copied in the emails. So I searched them by name, one by one, and I found that at least 20 of them were government officers at the same time that they were working for this other company. And that was, again, public records, and so on.
Okay. Drew, I am, another thing I was struck by when we had our interview last year was how much you guys rely on leaks. Not as the start of an investigation, but how integrated this has become, these mass leaks into how we document criminal regimes.
Yeah, this has been the golden age of leaks. I mean, we have probably about 40 or 50 terabytes of data. It costs us about $30,000 a month just to store the data that we have in leaks. And really the leaks, starting from the original Panama Papers and ICIJ, we still use Panama Papers, in stories, because what happens is, this is part of a global network. You get a piece of it, and as you get additional leaks, that piece now means something. And so you slowly, over time, piece together these leaks to paint a larger picture of what's really going on in the world. And it's forensic, and it's slow, and there's literally thousands more stories that we're not seeing in this. And the next thing is to really use artificial intelligence and everything to try to become more efficient at processing these leaks. But at the same time, unfortunately, we are training them to be much better at what they do, and the newer stuff is much more difficult to decipher. And they're
why is that?
Because they're not, in the old days they used family members as proxies, or now they're using people who are completely unrelated to them, who's set up by another group, and they go through incredible efforts to keep parallel systems that do not seem to be connected, but the connection is hidden, and they keep these parallel systems going. So that everything is done through another party that's not connected to them. So we know that they're doing this stuff. It's just much more difficult to connect, to prove for the story.
Do you think AI and the next generation of software is going to we're kind of in an arms race here.
It's an arms race
with the
exactly.
bad guys.
Yeah, it's an arms race, and we're constantly coming up with new things. Using social media. They're now much more disciplined on social media. They keep their kids off of social media, which is where we got most of our big things. But there are other things that are coming up and that we're using, and now we've got monitoring things so that we can look at who's going to a particular house, and it can read the license plates, and you could do that. And so it's really an arms race, that we constantly have to be creative to come up with new solutions. And we look at a lot of things system-wise now, so that you can look at, you know, boating, you know, shipping companies, and you can track their locations around the world, and you can see patterns of drug trafficking. And, you know, so you look at the macro, you look at the micro, you know, you approach this at different ways. They get better, we get better, and
Okay.
it's a fight.